So I'm Miguel Szymanski. I've been a journalist for the last 30 years, and I've been working in several countries, mainly in Portugal, but also as a journalist in Germany, and I work a lot for Austrian TV, and I started writing books some 15 years ago. The first book was a collection of my chronicles I wrote, of my editorials I wrote for a magazine, and it was published as a book, so it was not a real book, it was just a compilation of these, 50 chronicles. And then I moved, because of the crisis in South Europe, my wife and we were out of work as journalists. So I moved from Portugal to Germany and started to work as a journalist in Frankfurt. And there I gave some interviews because I was a newcomer to the country and there was some interest about the economic crisis in Southern Europe. So I gave some radio interviews, and then I was contacted by editors, by an editor from the group Random House, and he wanted me, because I mentioned a little bit of the history of my family, that my great-grandfather had left Germany 100 years ago because Germany was so poor at that time that he had to leave Germany, and his brothers emigrated to the United States, and he emigrated to Barcelona and later to Portugal. And 100 years later, I was emigrating the other way back, so back to Germany, and that sounded like an interesting story for the editor, and he asked me to write it. So that was my first book published in Germany. Then the crisis was more or less over, and I went back to Portugal and to Lisbon, and had a job as a journalist again and as a correspondent for German media. And I started writing the fictional books like this Polar here, Château de Cartes, but also a second Polar with the same cast, so to say. And now I have just finished an historic novel about an anarchist typographer and anarchist in the end of the 19th century who went to Africa to fight for the Portuguese Empire. So it's the history of an anarchist who became a soldier, and he became a very famous soldier, a military hero. And by accident he was my great-grandfather, and I had some diaries from him. So I had the inspiration to write about this story. And it's fiction too, because I didn't have enough material and I didn't want to write a dry biography, so I decided to make it an adventure story. And that's the book I finished last week. The editor has it, and he has been giving me a great feedback, so I hope it's also a success with the readers. Well, I didn't really, because especially this book here, the Château de Cartes, it has a lot of journalistic stories that were not publishable. I could not publish them. Some because I didn't have enough matter of facts to publish it. Others because no one wanted to publish them because they were very critical. Just to have an idea, I worked for an economic magazine, and I wrote about a banker, a Portuguese banker who was known as the owner of everything because he was so powerful, and he didn't like my article, so the magazine was closed. And that didn't only happen to me, it happened to other colleagues of me too. And nowadays the guy has been sentenced to a jail term because he is a crook. And I wrote that he was a crook, but at that time he was not a crook yet, he was still a very influential person. And that kind of stories that you cannot write as a journalist, unfortunately there are many of them, also in Western democracy, there are lots of them. So I took them, put them together in a bowl, stirred it, and made a Polar. Well, I started writing very early. When I finished my Abitur, that's the German Bac, when I finished it, I went to India for 6 months. I had inherited a small amount of money, And well, my brothers and sisters, they also inherited a little bit of money. It was not that much, but one bought a car, the other bought a stereo, and I spent my money in India in 6 months. And all the time I was there, I wrote a lot, and I wrote a lot about people, and I always had idealized working mainly as an author, as a writer. And I read a lot of books, and I read a lot of polar, a lot of adventure books, also real literature. So also the boring part, including the German classics and the Russian classics. And of course, they are not boring, but they are not so entertaining. And it's somehow difficult to read some of the stuff because it's very, very lengthy. I think we have a different idea now about what a book is. And in spite of this 300 pages, it has rhythm. It's not written with cliffhangers. I don't like cliffhangers. I don't like cheating the readers. I think the story itself has to be catchy, and I have to catch the readers by the story and not by mechanical tricks and technicalities. So it's just a good story, and you write it down as you would like to hear and read it. And of course, I also learned writing fiction by writing journalistic texts for 30 years. Well, it depends on. I did economic journalism for a long time, and there you have you really keep to the facts, but the way you select the facts, they become more or less interesting. If you take the last 3 days of your life, you can make a very boring story of it. But if you are a good observer, you can tell a story, a really good story about the last 3 days you lived through. Or maybe you reflect on that stories. But I also did a lot of journalism that was like storytelling. For instance, my last, it was not a written story. Of course, I had to write it too, but it was for television, for Arte, the Franco-German channel. And it was 35 minutes, that's a lot in television, 35 minutes, about the people who live from collecting mussels in the Tagus River in Lisbon. So there's this very big river, there's a crisis, and people go to the river, normal people, and they start picking mussels to earn some money. And every person you talk to is an incredible story. The one had a coffee shop, and the coffee shop was doing fine, but then came the COVID, and the bank took his business, and he lost his house, and he was living in the car, so he started collecting mussels, and he earned money with it. So every life, every person is a story. Learn a serious profession as plan B, but don't forget the plan A to be a writer, because it's, well, it took me a long time to start writing, I have to say. I always wrote to earn money as a journalist, and I started some, I don't know, 15, 20 books that never went beyond the first 4 or 10 pages. And only when I settled down my life and I had a really stable job and a good family life, I was able to really start a book and end the book. It took me a lot of time. I published the first book when I was over 40, so I was 42 or 43. By that time, other authors have already finished their careers. I started mine then.